All right, we're recording. Hello, everyone. Today's October 31st, and that's the official community meeting for Project Velero. As such, please follow the code of conduct and just be nice to each other. I'm going to paste the link to our community meetings to the chat, so it will be super cool if you add yourself and add your topics there. Yeah, so let's see if we have something added. Nothing yet. So let's wait a few seconds so everybody else can add their stuff. Anyone who wants to open up the floor and share something that is not yet into the agenda for today? No, super quiet. I think today it will be a rather quick one, as some of the folks.
Sorry, actually, I have two PR I want to discuss with the folks from Red Hat. I'm still editing it. My browser and network is super slow. So bear with me.
Sure. Daniel, do you want to share them? Because you can go through them. I'm not sure if I share them, it makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah. First, let me edit the HackMD, and I can
Sure.
share my screen.
All righty. Hello, Wes.
Hey, Orlin, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. Getting ready for my flight tomorrow, 11 and a half hours. So yeah.
Where are you
Yeah.
going?
To Chicago through Istanbul.
Oh, snap.
Yeah.
Well, safe travels.
Yeah. 11 and a half hours should be good. Yeah, but all right, cannot complain. We were discussing if you have some topics to add them. I see already Anshu added few stuff. By the way, if we do that prior the meeting, will be time saver for everyone. Just an idea for improvement. All right. It is. I suppose, Daniel, your topics, your two pull requests will be a bit longer to discuss. Are they new or?
They're not new. I think I just want to highlight some decision or disagreement. I don't think I expect we make a final decision on them, but just want to highlight the disagreement or highlight the things I want to cover and yeah, see what Scott and Shubham thinks.
Okay. I see Anshu added something in the status, so I suppose that will be a shorter one. Shubham, sorry, no Shubham. Anshu, can you go first, please? So then we can dedicate more time on the.
Yep. Yep. So basically, I've put the link for the CSI parallelism performance improvements that we were planning. We discussed this last in the community meeting in this time zone as well. I got a chance to discuss. So Scott and Sean had already kind of reviewed the initial thinking around it, and further, I had discussions with Lyndon and Daniel on the same topic. So few points have come around and kind of talk about them. I'm yet to update the PR with those. So there were concerns even in this meeting called around the FS backup flows or the PVB flows. Those also came up with discussions with Lyndon. So I will kind of double down and see if the changes that I'm doing can impact the PVB flows. That is part one. And part two is I'll kind of take help from Daniel to understand any other specific issues that we might encounter due to these changes and which we can fix to kind of move ahead. So those are like a couple of things to kind of unblock what we have right now. And third is I had few comments from Daniel to explore an item group kind of approach or thinking in this aspect as to how do we group items together and kind of see how we can kind of achieve that. So that is also something I'll try to cover as part of this design. Yeah, Daniel, you can also add anything if I miss from our discussion that day.
No, I think you
Oh,
have summarized well.
Yeah, I'll request kind of folks again to like go through it, since again this is a kind of a significant change and we are trying to address any or all concerns that we see which could kind of break or cause issues. So like feel free to please like pitch in or let us know if it breaks any scenario for you or kind of affects you. So yeah, that's pretty much it from my end. Kind of been working on this for now. Nothing else to call it from my end. Please go ahead.
So in short, I mean, you suggested 3 approaches. I think currently the preference is it approach 2 or 3? Let me double check. I recall it's approach 2.
It is the asynchronous approach in I forgot the approach number, where we trigger all the additional items we get for one item, we trigger backup for all of them in parallel. That is the approach I'm trying to push for now.
Yeah,
And
approach
like
2, right?
yeah, approach 2, and resolving what Lyndon said around trying out PVBs, and also any other concerns that anyone in the team can help point me out, and I can try to see nothing breaks as such. So yeah. Item group, I will try to explore.
I know I had initially, in my first review, suggested that I was thinking early on I was favoring approach 3, but at further discussion and looking in the code, I came to agree with Angel that the approach 2 actually makes more sense. So
yeah. My biggest comment is that we want to lay some foundation for future improvement, because we are thinking about improve the performance for single backup, and it will be very beneficial for us to introduce a concept like item group, and when we put things in item group, the items in one group will be backed up in parallel, and we control the parallelism with some settings. I think that's my biggest comment. Regarding other Lyndon's comment, I think we kind of reach agreement in our offline discussion.
Yeah, thank you folks for your inputs. That's it from my end. Please go ahead.
All right. Daniel, I'll stop, and if you can share the 2 PS on your side, it will be more productive if you share and walk this through.
Yeah. The first one is I wanna let me double check the number. The first one I wanna discuss is the one I think it's by Lyndon for the concurrency control. Sorry, my network is slow. So I'm actually in the correct window that
yes,
there's a PR.
Yeah, we see it.
Thank you. Yeah. I think the biggest disagreement is that whether we want to introduce a CR for the config. Our current preference is that we don't want to introduce a CR, especially for the configuration, because there is already the config map. And there used to be some debate regarding whether the setting should be set as the starting, the parameter of node agent server, or it should be saved in the config map. And Lyndon has some good point. It may be tricky for user to set the different settings for different nodes, because node agent server is managed by a daemon set. So we want a single source of truth and avoid the tricky case that one same setting is set in different places. So currently, I think the direction to go is to introduce a config map, and when the node agent server starts, it try to read the concurrency number from the config map. If it doesn't, if it's not set, there's a default number. I think that's the basic idea. Linda mentioned that Sean has some different idea. Is Sean on in this meeting? Is Sean online? If Sean is not here, that's the basic idea. And if there's no disagreement, I think Lyndon gonna refine this PR and we're gonna approve it and advertise it for 2 or 3 days. If there's no strong disagreement, I think this is the way to go, and we're gonna implement it in 1.13. Okay, I hear no disagreement, so we're gonna move on. And the next one, this one may take a little time. That one is by Shubham.
Just a quick note, I don't know if you saw my comment at the end or right before the meeting. I think that might be a good place to sort of step back, because I think we kind of have some disagreements at a requirements level rather than at a design level. We probably need to go through that first. Yeah, if you look at the end, I have a comment that I put right before probably about 10 minutes before the meeting.
Okay.
But basically, the approach that we had initially taken with this, the Shubham took with this was, and Shubham, correct me if I miss any of this, was taking the approach of, we already have a current mechanism of opt-in versus opt-out with default volumes to FS backup. We wanted to be careful to make sure that there was no confusion about how things worked and conflicting ways of implementing it. So the approach we took initially was, let's just use the same workflow but provide a different way of selecting those same things. From what I read through in the comments, it sounds like you and I think Lyndon also were actually, might have been someone else, I can't remember now, but suggesting we wanted to rework that workflow because it's kind of confusing and it's not necessarily ideal for long term, and to do a different approach.
Right.
Kind of a more selection-based approach. And I think that could work. My comment here was, if we do that, that's incompatible with the opt-in, opt-out. We need to have validation to say, okay, you're either using the legacy way of doing it or you're doing a new way. We don't want, it would be very confusing for users, even more so than the current, if we had to figure out, opt-in, opt-out and these new selection rules. I think if we did that, we'd want some validation. So if the user specifies true, or because that field in the CRD is a Boolean pointer. So if it's true, we're doing opt-out. If it's false, we're doing opt-in. If it's not set, then we're using the new way, and maybe have a validation to say, if you have volume policies, then you can't have opt-in or opt-out. Default volume staff as a backup has to be empty. If you set it, then you can't have volume policy rules for it. That way you're using the new approach or the old approach. We could even deprecate the old approach so that eventually we could get rid of it. So we just have a unified approach. But I think those are two different ways we could go. But I think we need to make that decision first, because otherwise we're commenting on a design that's trying to do one thing with requirements for another thing. So I think we need to step back from this design and figure out what we want this to look like first, and then go back and either revisit the design or something. And Shubham, anything I missed there, let me know.
I think that's a great suggestion. I think you nailed this, the real problem here. Yeah. And currently, I think my preference is that the current challenge for Velero, current problem is that we have so many different ways for the settings or similar settings. So it's always confusing for user if these are combined. So I hope in future we can, enable user to set the setting in one place, and that can be the single source of truth, and that will override other settings. I mean, we may not remove the support for other settings like the opt-in, opt-out annotation or some, setting in the CR, but it seems like currently the data structure of the volume policy is flexible enough to allow us to do so. But I agree that making the change to the backup flow can be tricky. I think, but I hope that's the way to go, because currently there are I be repeatedly asked by VMware customer that what's expected behavior if they set the annotation and the default file system backup and the CSI plugin at the same time. What's the priority? I think that's been confusing to the user for a while.
I agree.
And another issue is that when the RESIC support for Velero was introduced, somehow it was set as a top priority, but currently it makes it tricky if the user wants to. Seems a better situation is we should make the CSI snapshot a higher priority than the file system
Right.
path.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
again,
that's two of them. Yeah.
yeah, historically, I have a little more information just because, basically, originally we had Restic. We had two options. We had Restic and we had the volume snapshotters that only worked for EBS and Azure and GCP. So I think that's why kind of the approach was to add the default and kind of treat the file system backup as the default. But that was, we didn't have CSI, we didn't have Data Mover. Those are all newer features. So now we're kind of dealing with this legacy system. So I think if we do decide to go with the volume policy approach, we just need to have validations to say, okay, you're either using the new approach or the old approach. Let's not try to mix them because that'll be even more confusing than we have right now. For single backup. I mean, you can make one backup with default volume status backup and use the opt out, but then the next backup uses volume policies. That's fine. I'm saying within a single backup, I think we should do one or the other if we decide to go with this approach. And that would also, with the volume policies, allow you to especially if you took the approach where the first match is the one you use, you could specify, okay, any volume with CSI gets CSI backup, and then you have a catch-all at the end that matches everything else to say, okay, this is best backup. But you might even have some, I could imagine a future version of this where you would allow, okay, I want to do Data Mover for these volumes and just CSI for those, because right now there's no way for a single backup to use Data Mover for some and not the others. This approach could allow for that, not as part of this 113, but possibly post 113.
Yeah, it's a bit late here in Beijing, so
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So maybe I cannot think it through really clearly and quickly right now, but I think to have the validation, whenever user says something in volume policy, we disregard all the settings elsewhere may be problematic because still user may choose to like default for S2 FSM backup.
Well, that's why I'm thinking have a validation. So if they set default to FS backup and they set volume policies, we can have a validation here saying you have to pay this. If you think about, remember when we implemented the new includes excludes with the cluster scoped excludes and namespace scoped excludes, we have validation so the users can either use the new fields or the old fields, but they don't mix the fields because that becomes very confusing from a UX point of view. And so it might make sense here to have the same kind of thing, where you can choose the old way of doing it or the new way of doing it, but let's not mix them because then you have those messy priority questions. What takes a priority if you have a volume policy, but you also have an annotation and you have a default, opt in, opt out.
Yeah, I understand, but it's slightly different because as for the example you mentioned for the class level resource filter, we apply the filter to one resource, which is a backup CR. But the tricky thing here is that the annotation is applied to the PVs. It's not in the CR. And for the default thing, I think we yet to design how do we describe the default behavior in the volume policy. So I think that may need more time to think and design. If we can have a really easy way to figure that out, we can say, hey, you choose the volume policy, and so this default setting will be ignored or it's not allowed. You please remove it. If we can achieve that, that's doable. But currently, I think it may be tricky to define some default behavior in the volume policy. So
I think that might be
need to double check.
relatively easy, because if you take the approach where you take the first match and that's the policy you use, if your last policy matches every volume, you just have a generic match that doesn't have any exclusions, that'll be your default policy, because that'll be the catch when the caches. It's like the else clause, caches at the end. But I think the other problem is, and again, this is one of the confusing parts, even with the existing default volume set, because right now, if you're using opt-in, for example, then the opt-out annotations are ignored. If you're using opt-out, then the opt-in annotations are ignored. And so that's why my concern is if you honor those annotations, the ones that work with opt-in or opt-out, but you also have volume policies, how do those interact? So I'm thinking, because default volume stuff as backup is a Boolean pointer on the backup, So if it's true, you're using opt-in, opt-out rather. If it's false, you're using opt-in. And if you don't set it at all, then you're using the new volume policies. And that allows you to, on the backup CR, to say, you know, oh, we have this field set, we're using opt-in, we're using opt-out in the annotations, or this field is not set, then we're using the volume policies, and then you can have validation to say you can't set default volumes to FS backup and have volume policies for that. I mean, that's another process. But I think now we're getting into details that can be in the design. I think the point here is to make that decision. Are we trying to just provide an alternate mechanism that's functionally equivalent to the existing annotations, which is what the current design does? Or are we trying to step away from that, forget about opt-in, opt-out, to find a new way of determining whether we're using FS backup or CSI or something else?
I would vote for you walk away from the annotation. I think that's quite confusing, and based on my experience, the customers don't like it because it forces user to annotate his workload to impact the behavior of Velero.
That's the whole point of this design, right, Daniel? Because that is cumbersome, we
Right,
are introducing an alternative approach so that we could like get the same results via volume policies with just creation of one.
And the question is, right, whether we're doing opt-in, opt-out using the same rules, which is the first option, which is what this design does, or whether we were starting over and designing a completely different selection mechanism that doesn't use opt-in versus opt-out, but and in that case,
I think the opt-in, opt-out is problematic because it only controls the behavior of file system. I think ideally the action in the volume policy should be more explicit. Like we just tell Velero what to do. We are not telling Velero what not to do, because currently the opt-out is telling Velero not to use file system backup, but there are also different options. I think that's still confusing.
So I mean, one thing, and this is here's a couple of things that right now you can't do with opt-in or opt-out because it's a binary decision of yes versus no. If you want to have some volumes that are CSI only and some volumes are CSI with data mover, that you can't do with opt-in, opt-out. But the volume policies, if the policies were explicit, okay, I do this, right. In other words, like you said, you specify what you do, not what you don't do. Another thing that you can't do with the current system is there's no way to tell Velero, don't back up the data in this volume. In other words, you can skip the volume. We have that. But in terms of actually like, I want this, but I want the volume here when I restore, but I don't want the data in it because it's temporary. That's not, that could be a policy. Because right now with the opt-in, opt-out, we either attempt to use restic copia for every volume we back up, or snapshots, but there's not an option to back up the Kubernetes metadata, create the volume on restore, but don't actually put any data in it. So I don't know. I mean, that's possibly something you can get with that, but what's not obvious to me, Shubham, maybe how much extra work, like how much more difficult would it be to ignore opt-in, opt-out and just to use this different selecting mechanisms? So instead of using this as a way to include or exclude, basically, because right now we have that function we call that looks at the volumes and the annotations and possibly in the design based on this, the policy is to say, okay, these are included, these are excluded. And so instead of having two categories, this would have to have multiple categories of these are FS backups, these are,
right.
I think that's a little more complicated, but I don't know if it's hugely different in terms of the implementation.
I think the implementation may be difficult, but let's make decision on the the expected interface first. Even it's more expensive to implement, I think currently, in my opinion, that's worth the effort. I think. Because currently the behavior of Velero is somehow a little unpredictable that's why we are trying to introduce this PV information in backup, because that's always confusing for the user to figure out like how did Velero handle my particular persistent volume.
So is the PV information design also tracking, adding some tracking code for what kind of PV is getting which kind of workflow, backup workflow?
Yes.
So should this be worked in conjunction with that?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Should this the new requirement be worked in conjunction with that design after that design?
I don't know that they
That
necessarily
design is
really
ready,
interact.
and I think that's different part,
okay.
because that to achieve the PV information we mentioned, we just introduce a tracker. We already did that in 1.12, but that's only for the skipped PV.
Skip
So we
tracker,
just
yeah.
Currently we just expand the capability of that tracker to track more things, but that's already in the backup context. But
Okay.
for this new implementation, currently I'm thinking, I think that may be tricky, because it's, I don't have a quick answer now, but it is tricky for Velero to really have an action plan, like Velero walks through all the possible PV and figure out, for this one I should do this, for that one I should do that. I don't have a quick answer for that, but ideally we can reach that goal. But for the interface, I really don't want to introduce like exclude FS as an action, because the opt-out is proved to be a little confusing for the user. So I think the exclude really it's not very helpful for future enhancements, or when we add more actions. Yeah, that's
So Shubham, what I'm seeing here in terms of, I think the main difference in what you have and what what we were previously proposing and what we may be proposing now is that right now the code basically has the equivalent of the include and the exclude, and then you merge that in with the annotation data. And I think instead what this would mean is you would have initially just two actions, and a snapshot action and a FS backup action. And so for any given PV, based on the matching rules, it's either going to be a snapshot or it's going to be a PV backup, or possibly no match. But you can avoid that as an edge case by just having a catch all at the end. So again, you have an explicit action instead of an include or exclude. It's snapshot or it's FS backup. So from the point of view of identifying what the policy is for a volume, the only change from your design is the string that's there. The main difference is going to be in the code where we select, instead of merging two lists, the annotation list and the other list, there's a kind of an if test of, are we using opt-in, opt-out in the annotations, then do the current thing, or are we using policies, and then we just take that list of, okay, this volume is backup, FS backup, this other volume is snapshot. And so you generate the same type of list, but instead of merging two lists, you make a choice of which data source to use based on whether that default volume to FS backup field is set or not. And then we have that validation to figure out, what to
opt-in, opt-out.
I think that's the main difference.
Yeah. So if we are agreeing on changing the requirements, then yes, we'll have to rework the design.
Yeah, thank you for understanding, Shubham. I think we can check the progress later, and if that has to be delayed to the next minor release, I think I'm totally okay with that. So but I think my suggestion, yeah, it probably it's slightly better than the current design.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I think that covers all my topic, Orlin. And it's a bit late. I hope to drop earlier to get more sleep. Thank you guys.
Yeah, sure.
See you later.
Yeah. And I think we don't have anything else for the agenda for today, except someone wants to add something in the very last minute. Nope. In that case, I think we can have a half an hour back and talk to you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope to see some of you at KubeCon in 1 week time. Bye.
Take care. Safe travels.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.